Good afternoon, everyone. This is Betsy Hill, and I am very pleased to welcome everybody to our webinar this afternoon on how to stay calm during standardized testing. As we go through the presentation this afternoon, please, if you have questions, type them into the chat window or into the Q&A, either one, and we will try and answer as many of them as we can. So I designed this presentation primarily for students. And so if we have parents and teachers on, that's great, but I'm hoping that this will help you as you prepare your students to get ready for standardized testing, which is going to be happening for many students coming up in the next several weeks this year, although mostly it did not happen last year. So we have to get back into the routine and figure out how to do all this. So what we're going to be talking about this afternoon is what you can do as a student to be ready to do your best on a standardized test. We'll talk about some strategies that can help. And we'll talk about that moment that probably has happened to every one of us sometime in our lives where we're in the middle of a test and we think we really ought to know the answer to that question, but our mind just goes blank. What I wanted to do first is to start with a little bit of background. And for you students who I hope are listening, I don't know whether you've ever asked your teachers or your principals or your parents why we even have standardized testing. And people have a lot of different opinions about standardized tests, but the idea behind them is really pretty simple. So first of all, your parents and the people who make policy decisions and provide the funding, provide money to run the schools for them to operate, want to know how good a job schools are doing. So your school provides you with a whole bunch of things to help you learn. Your teachers, materials like textbooks and computer programs, athletic equipment, desks and chairs, maybe not so much this past year, but now we're getting back to them in many places. But all the things that you have in school that support the process of learning. This year, we have to remember that sometimes you haven't been able to do everything over the time period when everyone's been, or most people have been learning remotely. But all those things combined are there really to help you learn. So it makes sense that people who pay for them would like to find out how they're working. So the first reason is to see how schools are doing. The second idea is that having every student take the same test can help each student see how they are doing. And the point is to give you an opportunity to see how well you have learned the things that you are generally expected to learn as a third grader or a fourth grader or a fifth grader or whatever grade you happen to be in. And it can help you and your parents and your teachers understand if there's something you've missed out on or the areas where you are really just rocking and know your stuff and can really build on that. So what I want to do now is to have you imagine that this is a webinar, so nobody can actually put a stamp on this line. But I want you to imagine that you could, and recognizing that people feel very differently about standardized tests, I want you to think about how you feel about standardized tests and where you would put a mark on this line to show how you feel. So would you put a mark up near the 5 because, hey, standardized tests are cool, no problem. Maybe you even enjoy sort of testing yourself and finding out what you know. Or maybe you would put a mark nearer the 1 because you feel the opposite. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. There's no right or wrong answer. This is just how you feel about it. So each of you imagine putting a mark on this line that shows how you personally feel about standardized tests. And if you put your mark down near the 1 or to the left-hand side of that line, meaning standardized tests can cause some unpleasant emotions, You have plenty of company. If you look at a classmate, maybe you're at home after school right now, but think of one of your friends in your class, and then think of another friend in your class. And one of the three of you probably has serious test anxiety. 1 out of 3 students have enough that it's fairly severe, or at least moderate. So what we want to do next is we want to talk about what anxiety is and where it comes from. So if you think about those feelings you get when you're anxious or afraid or scared, all of these feelings are things that happen in our bodies, and it's our body's way of dealing with a scary situation. So things will happen when we get anxious, like our hearts beat faster, our lungs breathe faster, we may feel a little out of breath even, our muscles might get tense up, our pupils dilate, our digestion slows down. So those first things we're probably aware of. The last 3, maybe not so much. We're not really probably aware of how our digestion is working at that particular moment, because also our thinking is limited. And so here's what's going on. Think about a time when you were scared, and did you feel all those things going on in your body? So why do our bodies react this way? Why do all these changes take place? Because when we are anxious or concerned or scared, our bodies automatically know how to get ready to deal with whatever we might have to do. And it's called fight or flight. Fight, because we might have to defend ourselves. We might have to actually get into a fight with whatever that threat is. And flight, because we might have to run away. We might have to flee. And here's the really crazy part. Our bodies can have the same reaction, whether it's a man-eating tiger or a standardized test. Our bodies develop this automatic response to protect us in a dangerous situation. And the changes that happen in our brains and our bodies are very useful if we have to run away from something. A standardized test, of course, isn't as dangerous as a man-eating tiger, but for some people, it causes those same reactions in our bodies. So think about those things that are happening when you're in a scary situation. Our heart beats faster. That pumps more blood around to our muscles, which brings them the oxygen that they need to function. And that's also why we breathe faster. Our muscles need that energy to either fight or to run away. Our muscles tense, ready to run again, or punch, or whatever it is that they need to do. Our pupils dilate so that we can see more. Our digestion slows down so that all of the energy in our body actually goes to other things. It goes to our muscles and our heart and lungs so that we can be ready to fight or flee. And the part of our bodies that does our higher order thinking, like the kind you need to think about the questions on a standardized test, pretty much shuts down. So we can't think in our usual careful, thoughtful way, again, so that all of our energy in our bodies is directed towards our the parts of our bodies that will help us run or fight. And all of that happens because of a little tiny part of our brains called the amygdala. So way in the middle of your brain is a little almond-shaped and almond-sized structure called the amygdala. And it's the amygdala that monitors information coming in to your brain and decides when something is threatening. And it does this before you even consciously think about it. So sometimes you can be aware, not even aware of something, and still have that feeling of being frightened. So I want you to say out loud, amygdala. And I want you to tell your parents about this and your teachers. So practice saying it, amygdala, because this is the little tiny part of our body that causes all of that stuff. So for example, if you were walking through the woods and you saw a stick on the ground and it looked like a snake, your body would jump back even before you were aware that there was potentially some danger there. Now, this is just a pile of sticks as far as I know, but you might be walking along in the woods and think you saw that. And the point is that your body reacts, your amygdala senses that threat. It sees that incoming information that comes in through your eyes and it says, oh, could be a snake. And it gets your body to jump back before you're even aware of it. It triggers those actions. So it's the amygdala actually that starts the processes that end up releasing chemicals into our body. And one of the chemicals is called adrenaline. And that's that thing that really makes you feel like I've got a lot of energy. Sometimes if you're an athlete, you might feel that adrenaline before a race that really gets you ready to run fast or jump high or do whatever it is that you do as an athlete. So while the reaction is automatically, when we start to become aware of what's going on, we can do some things to calm down those nervous reactions. So when we realize it isn't a snake, we can calm down. And when we realize the test isn't really a man-eating tiger, we can calm down as well. So let's talk about what we can do when we know what's causing those reactions. We can actually talk to our amygdala. And here's how we're going to do this. Sometimes I hear kids who understand this when they get anxious or upset say, oh, I'm in my amygdala now. I'm feeling very stressed. I'm feeling anxious. And then they know that they can calm down. So let's try this together. I want you to take a deep breath, breathe in, and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. If you want to close your eyes, you can do that. Just breathe in and breathe out and think about the feeling of the air coming into your body and then going out. Just think about your breathing. Try to quiet your body, relax your muscles. Take another deep breath. Breathe in, breathe out. Just a few breaths like that can really help. Another thing that can help is to say something soothing or encouraging to yourself, and repeating a phrase can be something that's part of this routine. You can say, everything's okay. I'm okay. I've got this. Everything's fine. One thing I used to repeat to myself when I got to a standardized test was, all I can do is all I can do. And I found that reassuring. I'm going to do my best, and all I can do is all I can do. And actually, this little calming routine is something that you can practice and use, not just for standardized tests, but anytime that you feel upset, anxious, scared, nervous, stressed. Try it when you get to a point like that and see how it works for you. And the more you practice it, the more effective it will be. Now, not everyone has a lot of test anxiety. Some of us don't have a lot of that. In fact, 2 out of 3 students don't have a tremendous amount of it. We can be a little bit nervous, and that's fine, and we can still practice that. But there are times when we're going to feel a little bit nervous anyway when we're taking a standardized test or a test or doing something else that is important. And actually, that's good. Being a little bit nervous is okay, because that chemical that makes us anxious that we call adrenaline, a small amount of it is good. It actually keeps us alert and awake. Remember, we talked about the fact that you want to have a little bit of that in order to prepare and be on top of your game and be at your best. So if you're a little nervous, that's great. But if you feel so nervous that it's hard to think, then try that breathing exercise. And as I said, you don't need to wait for the test. You can practice this anytime. So we've already found one thing that can be very helpful to remember and to help us when we get anxious about a standardized test. And I thought that as we share some other things, I thought that this picture of a remote control might be a good representation and would help explain. The idea here being, it's not like your TV where you can control what channel you're on, how loud the sound is, all those kinds of things. You don't have control over very many things that your school provides you to help you learn and help you be prepared for a standardized test. You only have control over your own effort. So remember, when you're taking the test, the best you can do is your best, coming out of the learning experiences that you've had. The results will give you information on what you've learned and where you might have some gaps at the time you take the test. And it's also going to give that information to the people who are responsible for designing and creating your learning experiences. Also remember that you'll have many more opportunities to learn in the future. This next test is not your destiny. It's just one point in time. So what we want to do now is talk about some things that you can do before the test, things that you can do during the test, and even a couple of things that are good suggestions to do after the test is over. And I know that when I say test, I know sometimes there are multiple tests in several days, but the same principle applies whether it's one day or several days when you're getting ready and preparing for this. So one of the things that often happens is that your school or your teacher may give you an opportunity to take a practice test. A group that I spoke to recently, it seemed like the teachers had given so many practice tests. I'm not sure how the students had time to learn anything in between. But the point of taking at least one practice test is that it helps you become familiar with how everything works. So things that we're familiar with will be less scary. So it's less likely to trigger that fight or flight response on the test day. It gives you a chance to try out some test taking strategies. It gives you a chance to practice your breathing, your little calming routine that we just talked about. So take advantage of these practice test opportunities in order to practice all of those things. If you are not getting a practice test in school, so if parents are listening and want to help their children have an experience will help them become familiar with it, there are all of the standardized tests have sample practice tests online, and you can look up yours and find them, download them, or do them online, however they happen to work. And there are, when we come to test taking strategies, there are books and books and books and courses and all kinds of things. So there's a lot of different ideas for this, but I'm going to share my top 5. So my first one is for questions that involve reading a passage, reading a text of some kind. If you can read the questions before reading the passage, you should do that. Then your mind becomes more attentive to the information you're going to need to answer the question. So it will make you more efficient and more effective and more accurate when you, if you can have that opportunity to do that. If it's a multiple choice question, try to think of the answer to the question before you read the answers. If you think of the answer to the question, and then you look at the answers, and one is the one that you came up with, it's very likely to be right. But if you look at the questions first, then your mind can be taken off track, and it's not, the expression actually is anchoring, is sort of like it's not connecting necessarily to the best answer or the answer that would be that you would come up with if you had to think it through yourself. Narrowing down the choices. So this again is for a multiple choice question. Sometimes you may not know the answer right off, but you may be able to pretty easily recognize some answers that are wrong. So cross out or eliminate any answers that you know are wrong. If you can narrow it down to one or two, if you can narrow it down to one, obviously that's great. Got your answer. You narrow it down to a couple, at least it is, your chances are 1 out of 2, rather than 1 out of 4 or 5, depending on how many choices there are. Using your scratch paper, most tests, standardized tests, allow you to have some scratch paper or scrap paper or whatever they happen to call it. This is a great place for you to jot down a formula, to draw a picture of something, or to write down some words, to just jot down some of your ideas and to capture them, because when you can get them out of your head and on paper and you can see them, they're taking up less space in your mind. The part of our minds that we think with is called something called working memory. And working memory is our ability to hold information in our minds while we think about it. And one of the things that we know about working memory is that it has limited capacity. We can only hold so much in our minds and think about so much at one time. So if we can get some of those things out on paper, maybe jot down a few notes or draw something, we're going to have more space in working memory for us to think through whatever that problem was. And then finally, practice your calming routine to settle and refocus if you are feeling stressed at some point. If you don't know that, or you have that mind going blank feeling, that's the time to try it. There's some other things that you can do in the weeks leading up. And these are just good study habits anyway. If the tests are still a few weeks away, you're going to want to go on learning as usual, but be smart about how you study. So sometimes we just set aside a big chunk of time and say, oh, I'm going to just get it all done in this 1 hour. Well, that turns out that it's not a very effective way to study, and it's not a very efficient way to study either. Studying in short study sessions every few days is much more effective than one big long session. If you want to test yourself, you don't want to just review notes or look over things. You actually want to force yourself to have what's called effortful retrieval. So you have to make that effort. When your brain is making an effort to remember or recall some information, that actually strengthens the part of your brain that has that information. So flashcards are great, something similar. Create an online little test for yourself. And then as you're testing yourself, one of the mistakes that many students make is just to go through those cards over and over and over again. Well, and it gets pretty boring and your mind sort of tunes out. Your mind tunes out because it doesn't take much effort to retrieve the things that you've already learned and learned well. So set the ones you know aside and just keep practicing the ones that you don't know as well. Keep thinning out that list. If you find that you really, I really know that one, put it aside and just keep on working on the ones that you don't know as well. That will make your study time much shorter and much more effective. Don't try to cram at the last minute. Don't do any last minute studying. The information you learn at the last minute is easy to forget. And the fact that you forget it when you think you should remember it can actually make you feel more stressed. So don't try to cram in extra information right before the test. Another thing you can do in the weeks leading up, and this is good practice for learning in general, and just for how to be more competent and confident in our lives, is to practice what we call positive self-talk. So what you can do for this is to start by writing down a list of things that you are proud of and the characteristics that make you you. Keep this list around somewhere in your room, on a bookshelf, in your desk, tacked up on your mirror or taped to your door or something like that. It's a wonderful reminder of all the things that you've been able to accomplish and to learn over time. You can add to the list over time, pull it out every time you forget what an amazing person you are. So if you're thinking about your shortcomings, if you're feeling down, you're feeling discouraged, whatever it is, pull that list out and remind yourself about all those things that you're good at. And take a few minutes every day to remind yourself about all these positive things. This will help you feel more confident and less stressed when you go into whatever kind of situation you go into, test or otherwise. All right. So those are the weeks leading up. Now we want to talk about it's the night before the test, and there's some things that we can do to better prepare ourselves for the next day. If you are stressed, if you're not, don't even worry about this. But if you do feel very stressed or anxious, or you know you have test anxiety, spend a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, something like that, and write your feelings down on paper. Write down what worries you. This is something that research has shown can actually help you quite a lot. Write down those negative feelings. When you get those thoughts out on paper, it can help create more space in your mind for thinking about the other things. And you've sort of gotten them out of your head and onto that paper. What I then recommend is that you take that piece of paper and you crumple it all up and you throw it away and put it in the wastebasket. This can actually help you have more room for positive thoughts and clear thinking on the test. Sometimes they've also done research that this can work right before the test, but you may not have an opportunity to do it right before the test if it starts right when school starts and they've taken away your pencils and paper so that you can't, use your notes and things. So if you can do it right before, that's fine. That's another option. But if not, then the night before the test can also be helpful. However you feel about standardized tests, here are some things that everybody should do. No last minute studying, it won't help. Instead, go do something that you really enjoy. Some kind of physical activity, playing outside, especially would be a really great thing to do and to get prepared. No screen time for an hour before bedtime. This is actually a really good practice to make falling asleep easier and smoother and getting a good night's sleep. The impact that sleep has on our brains is really, for some people, quite surprising, but it's really very dramatic. We think much more clearly. We are less liable to get that fight or flight response. We are going to be, actually our memory consolidates, our memory gets stronger as we sleep. That's how things get stored in long-term memory, not just by studying them, but by then sleeping afterwards. And for elementary school students, most of you, 8 to 9 hours of sleep would be what is going to be important for you to think about doing that. So you might want to recruit your parent, your older sibling, somebody else to help you plan on how you're going to get that all-important sleep. So you don't leave it to chance. Don't just realize, oh my gosh, it's 10 o'clock at night and I was supposed to go to bed an hour ago. Make a plan. Think about what time you have to get up to be at school the next day, how long it takes you to get ready and have breakfast, how long it takes you to get ready for bed and settle down the night before, so that you know what time you have to get up the next morning and you know what time you need to go to sleep to get a really good night's sleep to be the best you can be the next day. The morning of the test, eat a good breakfast, protein as part of your breakfast. So protein, you get protein in foods like eggs and yogurt and cheese. There's some cereals that it can be high in protein. Milk is another good thing to make sure that you have with breakfast that day. And this is important because you can think about it as brain food. It will help your brain work better. And it will help much more than eating something very sugary, which will give you energy for a short period of time, but the energy probably won't last. And you may, if you eat something with a lot of sugar in it, you may find that halfway through the test, you're just exhausted and really don't have that energy. Get up, move around. You might do a few jumping jacks. You might run in place a little bit. You want to get that oxygen moving around your body and into your brain. Practice your calming routine. If you are feeling at all nervous, get a good start to the day, and do some of that breathing so that you can calm yourself before you take off and go to school. And finally, maybe this will surprise you, but put a smile on your face. In fact, if you're somewhere with a group of people, put a smile on your face, and then everybody will look at each other. So that feeling you have, that positive feeling, is something that smiles can cause. When you smile or when somebody smiles at you, it just makes you feel better when you look at them. Our brains react that way. Again, that's like an automatic reaction when we see somebody smiling. Sometimes people say smiles are contagious, so they're not really catching like a cold or a flu bug, but they're catching in the sense that it will give us a positive feeling, will make it more likely that we'll smile, and that will help you stay positive on that day. Smile at your teachers, smile at your friends. Everybody will be smiling at each other, and go into the test with a much more positive attitude. Once again, okay, now the test is going to start. You want to make sure you use your test taking strategies, and I'm going to repeat them here. We already talked about them, but I'm going to go through them again to reinforce them. If we hear something more than once, we're more likely to remember it. So that's why I'm going to share these again. Reading the questions before the passage if you can. Trying to think of the answer to a multiple choice question before you read the options. Narrow down choices. Cross out or eliminate any answers that you know are wrong. Use your scratch paper. Get that information, that formula, that picture, that idea, that list of things down onto your scratch paper and out of your head so that you can be more effective in working through the problems and the questions. Finally, work steadily. If you don't know the answer to a question and you don't know how to go at it, skip it and come back to it later. You want to keep your momentum. You want to keep your pace at a steady pace if you can. And so rather than stopping and spending a long time worrying about or stressing about a question, much better to just move on to a different type of question and come back to it later. If you have time left at the end of the testing session, go back and look at the questions that you skipped. Our brains have another wonderful ability, and that is to work on problems in the background when we're not even conscious about it. So if you read a question, you may come back to it and all of a sudden have an idea about what it means or how to do that question. You might not, but you might very well, because your brain has been working on in the background. So if it knows something about it or connect to other information, the similar kinds of questions or similar topics that you've learned about before, you may find that you're able to do it. And check your work. One of the things you can do is to make a little note on your scrap paper or whatever else you have available to you, the questions that maybe you weren't sure of that you said, oh, I'd like to come back and think about that one. So if you have time, that's something that is definitely recommended. It's very likely that you will encounter something on the test that you have never learned. So it shouldn't be a surprise. For most people, almost everybody, there will be something that they haven't learned, that they don't know. So that's a normal experience. It shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be a concern. It just is. There are some things that you won't know. Sometimes the people who write the tests want to try out new questions before they actually become an official part of the test, and they'll put some of those questions on just to see how they work. So it could be that it's something that you've never learned, and not because you were even supposed to learn it, but because it's just something that they're trying out. If you can eliminate some of those answers, again, because they don't make sense or they're too extreme, if you see something that says always or never, that's a pretty strong statement. If you can think of an exception, then you can pretty much eliminate that answer. And on most standardized tests, it is better to guess than to not answer a question. So it might not make a big difference, but unless they tell you that there's a penalty or they subtract points for wrong answers, then you might as well make that guess if you really have no idea, because again, it will work to your advantage. All right, so let's come back to that question that most students have. What do I do if my mind goes blank? So first of all, remember it's your amygdala. It's that little part of your brain, and you can talk to it. Go straight for your calming routine. It's normal and natural for your body to feel that because the amygdala is triggering those responses, but you can talk to it. Go straight for that calming routine. Take a deep breath and breathe out. Take another deep breath, breathe out. Relax your body, focus on something else, and then bring your attention back to the question or move to a different question. Very often, as we said, our bodies work on these things in the background, and just going and working on a different question or a different type of question, then coming back to it can help us focus and think more clearly. All right, so the test is over. What are we going to do now? Celebrate, right? Okay. But there are a couple of things I want to recommend. If there was a test item that you were unsure about that you could check, sometimes tests can actually be learning experiences, and we can learn things when we are aware that we have a gap in our learning, and we can actually check on it. So if there was one of those, go check it out, learn something, and then put the rest behind you. Take a deep breath, relax, go out and play, do something enjoyable, give yourself a reward. You worked hard, and it was only a test anyway, not a man-eating tiger. All right. Now, sometime down the road, you may actually get to see your test results. I don't know how quickly those test results turn around these days. If you take it online, it may be faster than if the test papers and booklets have to be sent in for grading to wherever it is they have to get sent. But hopefully at some point you will have an opportunity to see your test results. As you're doing it, remember, there was once a time when you didn't know how to do anything on that test. So whatever it is that it shows you've learned, you need to be proud of that. And you need to say, those are things that I've learned. Remember that sometimes you didn't know any of that stuff. What was your strongest area? Always focus first on what you're good at, because you can build on that. That gives you a good foundation for figuring out what your strengths are and how you can use those to your advantage. And then, were there any surprises? Always ask someone to go over the results with you, especially if there were surprises. your parents, your teachers, whoever it is that you can review this with, and figure out what you can learn from the experience. Was there something that you would or could do differently the next time? So I want to remember that testing is a learning opportunity. So a learning opportunity in the way that I just described, but I want to take it a little bit of a step further. If your teachers and the others who look at the test data already knew how you would do on the standardized tests that are coming up this spring, there would be no point in taking them. So they will be able to learn about how things are going, and so will you. And if you can think about it in this way, as a learning opportunity and learning experience, you will find you're probably going to be much less stressed, more just curious about how things will go and in a positive frame of mind. And you may find that there's actually something you can learn from the experience. So I'm going to give you an example. I took a standardized test once of how well I knew the French that I had learned in high school. And on that test was one question that I absolutely did not know the answer to. And I was sure that I had never seen this particular word. And I could eliminate two possible answers, but I had to guess between the other two. And it turns out that I guessed wrong. But as soon as I left the test, I went and I looked up the word I didn't know. It was the French word for carpenter, menuisier. And as you can see, after all these years, I know that word. And so sometimes when we leave a test not knowing something and we can get that answer right afterwards, it creates learning that will last for a lifetime. So I'm going to encourage you to take the same approach to that test you have coming up. Find something that you can learn from it. So now what I want you to do is to think about what the most important thing you think you can do to help you do your test, do your best on the standardized test. Too many things that rhyme with test and best. Because everybody is different. And so what is going to work for you may be a little bit different than what works for somebody else. And after you decide what those important things are, so maybe it's, okay, I really want to focus on getting that good night's sleep. I really want to focus on breathing, and I have my little I'm okay statement that I'm going to repeat to myself. And I want to make sure I get a protein breakfast in the morning before the test. So share that with your parents and your teachers so that they can help you. They can help you set you up for success so that you can actually use those strategies and implement them and have the benefit of them. Okay, so at this point, I am going to stop and see if we have any questions. I'm going to check in the chat window, and I do not see. So please, if you have questions, type them into the chat area or into the Q&A. And Karen, if you're there, just double check that I'm not missing something.
Nope, there isn't anything there.
All right, well, I'll give everybody just a minute to think about it some more. And while I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this little line up again. And I want you to think about how you feel about standardized tests now. And what I'm hoping is that you may not be all the way down at the 5 end, but I'm hoping that wherever you were at the beginning of this session, you're a little bit further to the right than you were before, because you now have some tools and some strategies. Hopefully you understand more about what is going on in your body when you feel anxious. And when we are familiar with something and we know what to expect and we know some things that we can do to give ourselves the best advantage to do well, usually that helps us feel better about whatever the situation is. Okay. So if you have questions later, you can certainly let me know. It looks like there's a question, 19A. How should we help our students when they fixate on what they missed? So that's a great question. What I would do is if they're going to fixate it, if they continue to think about it and just feel anxious and not have a strategy to do anything about it. So what I would recommend is that you actually have them write down whatever it is that they missed. So I missed 5 plus 6. I said it was 12, or I missed, I misspelled the word scenario, or whatever it was. If they can get that out of their heads and onto a piece of paper that they can go back and look at later, hopefully that would help them actually sort of get it out of their minds. It's when we have that, when we replay things over and over in our minds, that takes up working memory and it doesn't leave room for anything else, and then can make us feel very stressed when we play that over and over again. In fact, there's a wonderful book by Robert Sapolsky, and I think it's called something like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And the fact of the matter is that when a zebra is in a threatening situation, let's say they've been chased by a lion and they've survived, a few minutes later, all of that calm that they had before they knew there wasn't even a lion in the area comes back to them. They don't replay. The human brain is the only one that can replay and can dwell and fixate on something. And so if we can take a little page, if you will, from the zebras, and give ourselves the opportunity to get that out of our minds, off our heads, and somewhere if we need to come back to it, we can refer to it later. I think that could be a really good strategy. So thanks, Therese, for asking that. All right, I'm going to check the chat once more. Yeah. I think those are the questions. So thank you again for joining us today and for sharing this time with us. If you have other questions later, don't feel free to reach out, and we'll look forward to talking with you. We are recording this session, by the way, so it will be available probably tomorrow. We'll upload it on the website, so you'll be able to watch it again or share it with others maybe who weren't able to be at the session with us. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. And happy spring.